Millionaire heirs inherits the company and pretends to be secretary to test employees. She's horrified by what she overhears Emma Thompson gazing out at the city from the window of her luxurious penthouse at 28 years old. She was the heels to the Thompson Empire, one of the most powerful business conglomerates in the country. However, the satisfaction she should have felt that her privileged position was overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. 6 months ago, her father, the legendary businessman Richard Thompson, had suddenly passed away, leaving her in charge of a vast corporate empire. Emma had grown up watching her father run the business with a mixture of cunning and compassion, maintaining a delicate balance between financial success and employee well-being. It was up to her to maintain that legacy. However, something didn't add up since taking nominal control of the company. Though apparently solid, Emma had noticed subtle but worrying changes in the financial reports and seemed to have minor discrepancies. She couldn't explain meetings with the directors, men and women, who had worked side by side with her father for decades, felt increasingly tense and mysterious. But what troubled her most was the growing disconnect she perceived between senior management and lower-level employees. Rumors of discontent and veiled complaints reached her ears at an alarming frequency that morning. Emma made a bold decision. If she wanted to understand what was happening in her company, she needed to see it from the inside without the filter of her privileged position. Determined and apprehensive, she formulated a risky plan to infiltrate her company under a false identity. Emma spent the next few weeks meticulously preparing for her transformation. She dyed her hair discreetly, swapped her designer wardrobe for more modest outfits, and practiced a slightly different accent. She created a fictitious identity, Sarah Johnson, a young woman with no experience looking for her first job as a secretary. The day Sarah showed up at Thompson Corp headquarters for her interview, Emma felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She observed the imposing building that housed her family's empire, this time from the perspective of just another hopeful among hundreds. The interview was with Barbara Collins, the human resources director Emma had known since childhood. Still, disguised as Sarah, she faced a cold and calculating woman very different from Aunt Bob. She remembered Miss Johnson. Barbara said, examining her fictional resume with disdain, "Your experience is practically non-existent. Why should we hire you, Emma?" In her role, Sarah responded with genuine nervousness and feigned enthusiasm. "I know I don't have experience, Mrs. Collins, but I will work hard and learn quickly. I'll give my best in every task assigned to me." Barbara looked at her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Sarah, we don't usually hire people without experience for positions in the main office. However, the marketing department urgently needs a temporary assistant. It will be a demanding job, and don't expect any special treatment." "Do you think you can handle it?" "Of course, Mrs. Collins. I'm ready for any challenge," Emma replied, aware of the irony of asking for a job in her own company. "Very well," said Barbara, closing the folder. "You start tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp, so don't be late." As she left the office, Emma felt a mixture of triumph and apprehend. She had managed to get in, but this was just the beginning. What she would discover in the coming weeks would forever change her perception of the company she thought she knew so well. That night, in the solitude of her penthouse, Emma looked at her reflection, as the powerful Thompson says for the last time. Starting tomorrow, she will completely immerse herself in her Sarah Johnson role. As she prepared for bed, she couldn't help but wonder what secrets would be uncovered, and at what price that knowledge would come from the Thompson court. The building loomed imposingly against the morning sky when Emma, now fully transformed into Sarah Johnson, crossed its main doors. The nervousness she felt was real. Despite knowing every corner of this place today, she saw everything with new eyes. She headed to the security desk, where a guard looked at her indifferently. "Sarah Johnson, it's my first day," she said, surprised at how strangely her voice sounded like a practiced accent. After receiving her temporary credential, Emma headed to the elevators. While waiting, she couldn't help but notice the sidelong glances thrown at her by passing executives, some of whom she had known since childhood. None recognized her, but all seemed to be evaluating her as if trying to determine if she was important enough to merit their attention. The discomfort she felt was genuine. The marketing department was buzzing with activity. When she arrived, a middle-aged woman with a perpetually tired expression greeted her. "You must be the new one. I'm Marth, the department's executive assistant. Follow me and I'll show you to your desk." Emma followed Martha through a maze of cubicles until they reached a small desk in a corner far from the windows, which was anything that could be considered a pleasant view. Martha said this would be your space, pointing to the worn chair and the computer that looked several years old. "Your main job will be to assist the marketing executives in whatever they need, including MA, King photos, copies of preparing coffee organizing schedules, and anything else they ask of you." Emma nodded, trying to appear grateful. "Yes, Attunity, yes, of course. I'll do my best," Martha replied without much enthusiasm. "Oh, and one more thing, Mr. Reeve. RS, the marketing director, is very demanding with his coffee. He takes it black, with no sugar, at exactly 65 degrees. There's a thermometer in the kitchen. If you mess it up, you'll know with those encouraging words." Martha left her. Alone, Emma sat down feeling strangely small in this space that technically belonged to her. She turned on the computer, which took several minutes to start, and began familiarizing herself with the systems. It wasn't long before the demands started. Executives who barely looked at her handed her stacks of documents to photocopy, dictated emails at breakneck speed, and asked her to schedule impossible meetings by mid-morning. Emma was already exhausted. It was then that she met Mark Rivers, the marketing director, who was tall and handsome and had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mark approached her desk. "So you're the new one," he said, looking her up and down. "I hope you're more competent than the last one. I need these reports sorted and summarized for the 2 meeting, and my coffee is black, with no sugar at 65 degrees." Emma completed. Remembering Martha's warning, Mark raised an eyebrow. "At least you can follow simple instructions. We'll see how long you last." As Mark walked away, Emma felt a mixture of anger and surprise. She had always considered Mark a brilliant and charismatic executive, but seeing him behave arrogantly and dismissively was an unpleasant revelation. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of seemingly endless tasks. Emma was accustomed to leading meetings and making important decisions, but found herself struggling with the photocopier, running back and forth with cups of coffee and trying to decipher the illegible handwriting of impatient executives. Most revealing, however, were the conversations she overheard. Fragments of discussions about budget cuts, rumors of layoffs, and complaints about the incompetence of the new management reached her ears. Each comment was like a stab, making her question everything she thought she knew about the state of her company at the end of the day. Exhausted and with sore feet from the cheap shoes she had bought for her disguise, Emma was preparing to leave when Mark appeared again. "Sarah," "Right," he said, not waiting for an answer. "I need you to stay and finish organizing these files. It's crucial for tomorrow's presentation." "But it's quitting time," Emma protested weakly, surprised by her submissiveness. Mark looked at her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "If you want to survive here, you'll have to learn that quitting time is flexible, especially for someone in your position to understand without waiting for an answer." Mark dropped a stack of folders on her desk and left whistling cheerfully. Emma sat there looking at the mountain of work in front of her, feeling a mixture of anger and determination. This day had opened her eyes to a reality she would never have imagined from her ivory tower. And although part of her wanted to scream her true identity and put an end to this unfair treatment, she knew this was only the beginning as she worked on the files. Emma promised herself that she would get to the bottom of what was happening at Thomson Corp, no matter the cost. She didn't know how high that cost would be and how much it would change her life in the process. As the days passed, Emma, in her role as Sarah, began to adapt to her new routine. The long hours, unreasonable demands, and condescending treatment became her new normal. However, beneath the facade of the inexperienced secretary, her analytical mind worked tirelessly, gathering information and connecting dots. One morning, while preparing the conference room for a directors' meeting, Emma noticed something strange. Mark and Barbara, who typically maintained a strictly professional relationship, was engrossed in a whispered conversation in a corner. Their tense expressions and furtive gestures piqued her curiosity. "We must be careful," she heard Barbara say if someone discovers Mark interrupted her with an abrupt gesture as he noticed Emma's presence. "Sarah, what are you doing here preparing the room for the meeting?" Mr. Rivers, Emma replied, feigning nervousness. "Well, hurry up and leave," Mark snapped, "and remember whatever you may have heard, it's none of your business." Emma nodded submissively and left, but the seed of suspicion was already planted. What were Mark and Barbara hiding? As she pondered this, she bumped into Anne, another department assistant. The documents Anna was carrying were scattered across the floor. "Watch where you're going," Anna exclaimed, bending down to pick up the papers. "I'm so sorry." Emma apologized and helped her as they collected the document. Emma noticed that some financial reports took advantage of a moment of distraction from Anna. She quickly memorized some of the numbers she saw, and Anna looked at her suspiciously. "You're new here, aren't you? A piece of advice, keep your head down and don't meddle in things that don't concern you." There are eyes and ears everywhere with those cryptic words. Anna walked away, leaving Emma intrigued and a little uneasy. That afternoon, while organizing mail, Emma met Charlie, the janitor, an older man with a kind smile. Charlie seemed to be invisible to most executives. "Don't worry, little one," he said, seeing her struggle with a pile of envelopes. "Everyone feels overwhelmed at first, but you'll learn to navigate these waters," and smiled gratefully at him. "Thank you, Charlie. Sometimes I feel like I need to be more confident here." Charlie looked around and lowered his voice. "Be careful, Sarah. This place has changed a lot in the last year. It's not the company it used to be." "What do you mean?" Emma asked. "Well, I've been here for over 30 years. I saw little Emma Thompson grew up, God rest her father's soul, but lately, there are secret Sarah things that shouldn't happen in a company like this." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of secrets? Charlie, the janitor, looked nervously around before answering. Documents that disappeared, closed-door conversations, employees who are fired without apparent reason. And rumors say, there's money that doesn't appear in the books. Before he could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Charlie quickly grabbed his cleaning cart and left Emma with more questions than answers. In the following days, she found herself divided between her tasks as Sarah and her growing undercover investigation. She began to pay more attention to hallway conversation documents, passing through her hands, and to employees' reactions to certain management decisions. One afternoon, while working late organizing files in Mark's office, Emma found something disturbing hidden among seemingly ordinary invoices. The contract was a document detailing transfers to an offshore account, and the amounts were astronomical and didn't match any legitimate company operation she knew of with her heart. Emma discreetly took photos of the document with her phone, and just as she was putting the file away, she heard voices approaching. It was Mark and Barbara. "I'm telling you, someone is snooping around D." Barbara said her voice was 10, but the numbers didn't add up, and I noticed some documents were missing. "Relaxed," Mark replied in a tone meant to be reassuring, but that sounded more irritated. "No one can prove anything. Besides, by the time they figure it out, it will be too late." When the door opened, Emma barely had time to return to her desk and pretend to be working. Mark seemed surprised to see him. "Sarah, what are you doing here so late?" "I was finishing organizing the files you asked for, Mr. Rivers," Emma replied, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Mark looked at her suspicions. "Well, you can go now, and remember, discretion is part of your job." Then, that night, in the safety of her apartment, Emma examined the photos she had taken. The evidence was clear: someone was diverting funds from the company, but who was behind it all? And how deep did this conspiracy go? As she pondered her next step, Emma realized she was in a dangerous position. If Mark and Barbara discovered her true identity, her entire plan would fall apart. On the other hand, if she didn't act, the company her father had built with so much effort could collapse. With renewed determination, Emma decided it was time to seek allies. Charlie, with his knowledge of the ins and outs of the company, could be invaluable, and maybe she thought even hostile Anna might have helpful information. Emma didn't know that her actions had already caught the attention of more people than she imagined in the shadows. Both friends and enemies were beginning to move, and the delicate balance of power at Thompson Corp was about to break. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Em. During the day, she continued as Sarah, the inexperienced but hard-working secretary. At night, she immersed herself in the investigation, analyzing the documents she had photographed and looking for connections. While preparing coffee in the break room one morning, Emma noticed that Anna was watching her with curiosity and weariness. Sarah, Anna said that approaching you because you are new seems very interesting in things that aren't concerning you. Emma felt her heart race but kept her COO. I'm just trying to do my job well, Anna. I want to learn everything I can about the company. Anna let out a dry laugh. Learn to believe, Em. There are things in this company that it's better not to know unless what Emma asked. Intrigued, Anna looked around before speaking in a low voice. Unless you're looking for something specific. Look, I don't know who you really are or why you're here, but I'll give you some advice if you're investigating what I think you're investigating. Be careful. There's more at stake than you imagine. Before Emma could respond, Anna quickly walked away, leaving her with a mixture of confusion and hope that it could Anna be an unexpected ally. That afternoon, while filing documents in the basement, Emma re-encountered Charlie. Sarah. What a surprise to see you down here, said the janitor with a kind smile. Emma decided it was time to take a risk. Charlie, I need your help. Something terrible is happening in the company, and you might have crucial information. Charlie's expression turned serious. I knew you weren't a simple secretary. Who are you, Sarah or Miss Thompson? Emma felt the ground open beneath her feet. How I've watched Emma Thompson grow up, Charlie said with a sad smile. You may have changed your appearance, but you can't change who you are at heart, your eyes and your way of speaking. They're your father's. For a moment, Emma considered denying everything, but something in Charlie's gaze made her change her mind. You're right, Charlie. I'm Emma Thompson. I'm here because I know something isn't right in my father's company, and I'm determined to find out what it is. Charlie nodded approvingly. I'm glad that Mr. Richard's spirit lives on in you. Listen, I've been collecting information on my suspicious invoices and strange conversations with employees who disappear overnight. I can help you. For the next hour, in the basement's farthest corner, Charlie shared everything he knew with Emma: names, dates, and suspicious transactions. Each piece of information was like a light in the darkness, gradually illuminating the complete picture of corruption her father had discovered. But be careful, Emma. Charlie warned at the end. Mark and Barbara is one of many involved. This goes beyond them, possibly to the highest levels of the board of directors. Emma felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Thank you, Charlie. You don't know how much this means to me. I promise I'll do the right thing with this information. That night, back in her apartment, Emma immersed herself in connecting all the dots with Charlie's information and her discoveries. She began to see the pattern. It wasn't just a case of embezzlement. It was an elaborate plan to dismantle the company from within systematically. As she worked, a disturbing thought crossed her mind. If the conspiracy had reached as high as Charlie suggested, who could she trust? And how could one person stop something so big that the sound of her phone pulled her from her reflections? It was a message from an unknown number. I know who you are and what you're doing. Meet me tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the coffee shop on the corner. Come alone. Emma stared at the message, her mind racing. Was it Anna or someone else who had discovered her identity? Whoever it was, she knew this meeting could be crucial for her investigation or a trap. With determination, Emma decided she would attend the meeting but wouldn't go unprepared. It was time to use all the resources at her disposal, even if that meant revealing her identity to more people as she prepared for another day. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to cross a point of no return. The secrets of Thompson Corp were about to come to light, and she would be at the center of the approaching storm. The day passed with palpable tension, for Emma's every look and every whispered conversation seemed to be charged with hidden meaning as she performed her daily tasks. Sarah's mind kept racing about the mysterious meeting that would take place that night at 6:45 p.m. Emma left the Thompson Court building. Her heart pounding in her chest, she walked the few blocks to the designated coffee shop, constantly looking over her shoulder to make sure no one was following her. The coffee shop was almost empty when she entered. She scanned the place, looking for any familiar face, when a voice startled her. Emma is at a secluded table, partially hidden by a decorative plant. Anna's expression was a mixture of nervousness and determination. Emma approached cautiously and sat down. "So you knew?" Anna nodded. "I suspected from the beginning you're good, but there are certain things you can't completely hide. Besides, let's say I have experience recognizing people who aren't who they claim to be." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, intrigued. Anna sighed deeply before answering. "I'm not who I appear to be either. My real name is Andrea Vega, and I'm a private investigator hired by a group of minority shareholders of Thompson Corp. They've been concerned about some irregularities in the company." Emma felt a mixture of relief and caution. "Why are you telling me this now?" "I believe we're on the same side," Andrea replied. "I've been investigating for months and discovered things that would make your blood run cold. But I need your help to get to the bottom of all this." For the next hour, Andrea shared with Emma everything she had discovered. Her investigation corroborated much of what Emma already knew, but added new and worrying pieces to the puzzle. "The plan is more significant than you imagine," and Andrea explained they're not just diverting funds. They're preparing the company for a hostile takeover. Mark Barbara and some board members are in collusion with a rival corporation. They plan to devalue Thompson Corp's shares to the point where they can buy them for a fraction of their value. Emma felt short of breath. "But why? How could they betray my father's trust like this?" Andrea looked at her sympathetically. "Money and power, Emma. It always comes down to the fact that they've been promised lucrative positions in the newly merged company in exchange for their cooperation. We have to stop them," Emma said, her voice full of determination. "But how? We need solid evidence." Andrea said, "That's where you come in. With your access as Sarah and my investigative experience, we can gather the necessary evidence. But we'll have to move fast and be extremely careful as they discuss strategies." Emma noticed a movement out of the corner of her eye. A man at the coffee shop bar seemed to be paying too much attention to their conversation. Emma whispered, "I think we're being watched." Andrea looked discreetly in the direction Emma indicated, her expression tensed. "Is it one of Mark's men? We need to leave now." The two women casually stood up and headed for the exit. Just as they were about to reach the door, the man from the bar moved to intercept them. "Ladies," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Mr. Rivers sends his regards and reminds you that loyalty to the company is paramount." Emma felt a chill run down her spine, but Andrea intervened calmly. "We appreciate the message. Please inform Mr. Rivers that we understand the importance of loyalty perfectly." The man stared at them for a moment before nodding and stepping aside. Emma and Andrea quickly left the coffee shop, blending into the crowd on the street that was close. Emma said, her heart still racing. Andrea nodded. "Too close, Emma. From now on, every move we make will be watched, and we'll have to be extremely careful what we do now." Emma asked, "We stick to the plan?" Andrea replied with determination, "But we need to speed things up tomorrow during the board meeting. We'll make our move. I'll need you to get me access to the server room while everyone is distracted by the meeting." Emma nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. "I'll do it. But Andrea, if things go wrong..." Andrea interrupted her with a reassuring smile. "I have a backup plan if things go wrong, but I trust we'll succeed. Your father would be proud of you, Emma." Those words resonated in Emma's mind as they separated, each taking a different path to avoid being followed that night. As she prepared for the crucial day ahead, Emma couldn't help but think of her father. Would he be proud of her, or would he be disappointed that the company he had built with so much effort was on the brink of collapse? The morning arrived with a palpable sense of urgency. Emma, in her role as Sarah, arrived early at the office, her mind going over every detail of the plan they had drawn up with Andrea. As she prepared the boardroom for the meeting, Emma noticed the tension in the air. The arriving executives seemed more agitated than usual, exchanging furtive glances and hurried whispers. Mark entered the room, his usual air of arrogance mixed with a touch of nervousness that only Emma, knowing the truth, could detect Sarah. Mark barked, making sure no one disturbed the US during this meeting. There must be no interruptions. Yes, Mr. Rivers, Emma replied, lowering her gaze to hide the flash of determination in her eyes as the board members arrived. Emma carefully observed their interactions. Some seemed complicit, exchanging knowing gestures, while others showed signs of concern or confusion just before the meeting began. Barbara approached Mark, and Emma ensured she was close enough to hear their whispered conversation. "Are you sure it's time?" Barbara asked, her voice tense. Mark nodded firmly. "We have no choice. The buyer is pressuring us today. We'll present the restructuring proposal and prepare the ground for the sale." Emma felt her heart race. It was worse than they had imagined. They weren't just diverting funds but planning to sell the company that very day. Emma took the opportunity to slip away with the meeting underway. She quickly headed toward the server room where Andrea was waiting. "Did you get the access card?" Andrea asked. Emma nodded as soon as she saw her, handing her the card she had borrowed from Mark's desk. "We have to hurry. They plan to present the sale proposal today." Andrea cursed under her breath as she swiped the card. The door opened with a soft click. "We have less time than we thought. Let's go inside the server room." Andrea worked quickly, connecting a device to one of the terminals. This will download all the financial records and emails from the last 6 months. "Hopefully we'll have all the evidence we need." Emma nervously watched the door. Each second seemed like an eternity. "How much longer? Just a few more minutes," Andrea replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Almost done. Just as Andrea disconnected the device, they heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. Emma felt her blood run cold. Someone was coming to Andrea, quickly tucked the device into her bag, and they both desperately looked for a place to hide. The supply closet at the back of the room was their only option. They squeezed inside, just as the server room door opened through the slats of the closet. Emma could see Mark enter, followed closely by a man she didn't recognize. "Are you sure no one suspects?" the stranger asked. Mark let out a confident laugh and relaxed. "Victor, everything was under control. The board will approve the restructuring in a few hours, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." "It better be," Victor growled. "My company isn't investing millions in this plan, so you should ruin it at the last minute." Emma had to suppress a gasp. This must represent the rival corporation's plan to acquire Thompson Corp. The two men continued discussing details of the plan, oblivious to the two women hidden just feet away. Emma felt her heart beating so loud she feared they might hear it. After what seemed like an eternity, Mark and Victor finally left the room, and Emma and Andrea waited a few more minutes before daring to leave their hiding place, which was too close. Andrea whispered, her face pale from the tension. Emma nodded, still trying to process what they had overheard. "We have to act now, Andrea. We can't wait any longer." Andrea looked at the clock and then at Emma, her expression a mixture of determination and concern. "You're right. It's time to put the final phase of the plan into action. Are you reading?" Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Everything her father had worked for, the future of hundreds of employees, depended on what they did in the next few hours. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "Let's do this." As they cautiously left the server room, Emma couldn't help but think about how her life had changed quickly from carefree eyes to an undercover investigator. She was about to confront the people she had once unquestioningly trusted. What she didn't know was that the events that were about to unfold would change not only the fate of Thompson Corp, but also her own life in ways she never could have imagined. The clock struck 2:30 p.m. When Emma and Andrea put the final phase of their plan into motion. The board meeting was at its peak, and it was the perfect moment to act. I remember Andrea whispering as they prepared whatever happened, staying calm and sticking to the plan. Emma nodded, feeling a mixture of adrenaline and fear running through her veins. She removed the wig and contact lenses that had been part of her disguise as Sarah, revealing her actual appearance. It was time for Emma Thompson to make her grand entrance with determined steps. Emma headed towards the boardroom, Andrea following close behind without bothering to knock. She flung the doors wide open, interrupting the meeting in full swing. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Mark, who was in the middle of a presentation, stood slack. George's face changed from surprise to panic. "In a matter of seconds, the ladies and gentlemen," Emma said, her voice firm and clear. "I apologize for the interruption, but we had a much-needed conversation about the future of Thompson Corp." Barbara was the first to recover from the shock. "Emma D.A., what is the meaning of this? We weren't expecting you today." "I'm sure you weren't," Emma replied with a cold smile. "I'm sure you'd prefer it if I weren't here at all." Mark tried to regain control of the situation. "Emma, I don't know what you think is happening here, but everything is in order. Please discuss this in private." "Oh, I don't think so," Emma interrupted. "Everyone deserves to know exactly what you've been planning." With a gesture, Andrea stepped forward and connected her device to the projector. Within seconds, documents, emails, and financial records appeared on the screen. As you can see, Emma continued addressing the stunned board members for months. Specific individuals in this room have been systematically diverting funds, manipulating reports, and preparing the company for a hostile takeover. And murmurs of shock and confusion filled the room. Some board members seemed genuinely surprised, while others, Emma noticed that he seemed more concerned about having been caught, marking his facade of confidence crumbling. Tried one last desperate play. "This is ridiculous. You can't barge in here and throw around baseless accusations of security." But before anyone could move, the door opened again. To everyone's surprise, Charlie entered, accompanied by 2 police officers. "I'm afraid that won't be necessary. Mr. Rivers, one of the officers, said we have a warrant to confiscate all financial and electronic records of Thompson Corp, and you'll be coming with us to answer some questions." Chaos erupted in the room. Mark and Barbara were handcuffed and escorted out. At the same time, other board members desperately tried to distance themselves from the conspiracy amidst the tumult. Emma found herself face to face with Victor, the representative of the rival corporation she had overheard in the server room. "You're cleverer than we thought, little," Thompson Victor said with a migration and frustration. "But this isn't over. There are forces at play that are more significant than you can imagine." Before Emma could respond, Victor was approached by the officers and taken away for questioning. As the police began gathering evidence and interrogating those present, Emma found herself surrounded by those board members who weren't involved in the conspiracy. Their faces showed a mixture of shock, relief, and concern. Emma said one of them was an older man who had been a close friend of her father. "We had no idea of the magnitude of all this and what would happen to the company." Now Emma looked around at the expectant faces of the officers working at Andrea and Charlie, watching her with pride. She took a deep breath before responding. "And now," she said with determination, "that we would rebuild. We're going to make Thompson Corp the company my father always dreamed it would be: transparent, ethical, and focused on the well-being of its employees and customers." As Emma spoke these words, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had unmasked the conspiracy and saved her father's company, but she knew this was only the beginning. The challenges that awaited her would be just as difficult, if not more so. What Emma didn't know was that while she celebrated this victory, other forces were already in motion, forces that would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, and that would see her triumph as a mere complication in their more extensive plans. The real battle was just beginning in the days following the dramatic revelation in the boardroom, were a whirlwind of activity for Emma. The news of the conspiracy at Thompson Corp spread like wildfire, generating headlines in every newspaper and newscast in the country. Emma found herself at the center of a media storm, facing an avalanche of questions from journalists, investors, and employees alike. Each day brought new challenges and revelations. One morning, as she prepared for another long day of meetings and interviews, Emma received an unexpected call. "Miss Thompson," a grave voice said on the other end of the line. "This is Detective Ramirez. We need you to come to the police station. There are developments in the case that you should know about." With a knot in her stomach, Emma headed to the police station. Detective Ramirez greeted her grimly. "Miss Thompson, First, let me congratulate you on your bravery," and the detective began. "However, I'm afraid the situation is more complex than we initially thought." Emma felt her heart race. "What do you mean?" The detective pulled out a folder and opened it on his desk. "We've been interrogating Mark Barbara and the others implicated in what we've discovered, and it seems the conspiracy goes beyond Thompson Corp. There are indications of a corruption network involving several significant companies and high-ranking government officials." Emma felt short of breath. "But how could that be possible? What does this have to do with our company?" Thompson Corp was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Ramirez explained that the hostile takeover they were planning was part of a scheme to monopolize several critical sectors of the economy. "And there's evidence that some of these plans were set in motion during your father's management." Those last words hit Emma like a punch to the stomach. "No," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's not possible. My father would never have been part of something like this." Did Detective Ramirez look at her sympathetically? "I understand this is difficult to process, Miss Thompson, but the facts are that we found documents signed by your father that suggest that, at the very least, he was aware of some of these activities." Emma stood up abruptly, unable to keep sitting there. "This has to be an explanation. My father dedicated his life to building an ethical company, but couldn't have been part of it. I suggest you prepare yourself." Ramirez said gently that this investigation is just beginning, and I'm afraid more things will come to light that could be unpleasant. Ramirez continued, stunned. Emma left the police station. Her mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts and emotions. How could she reconcile the image of the loving father and ethical business people she knew with these new and disturbing revelations that night? Unable to sleep, Emma reviewed old photos and documents in her father's study. Every image and every memory now seemed tainted with doubt. A knock on the door startled her, and it was Andrea. "I thought I'd find you here," the investigator said. "While entering the room, I heard about what happened at the police station. How are you holding up?" Emma let out a bitter laugh. "How do you think I just discovered that my entire life might have been a lie, that the man I admired, who I believed was incorruptible, might have been one of them?" Andrea sat beside her, observing the photos scattered across the desk. "Emma, I know this is hard, but don't jump to conclusions. Your father might have had reasons for being corrupt." Emma snapped about his reasons for doing what he did. Andrea gently corrected the business world at that level, saying it's complicated. Sometimes the lines between what's proper and necessary become blurred. Emma ran a hand over her face, exhausted. "What am I supposed to do now, Andrea? How can I run this company, face the media and the employees knowing what I know?" Andrea looked at her with determination. "You'll do it because you're stronger than you think. Regardless of what your father may or may not have done, you are your person. And Thompson Corp needs a more decisive leader now than ever." At that moment, Emma's phone rang. It was an unknown number, and she was apprehensive, so she answered. Miss Thompson said in a deep, unfamiliar voice, "I don't have much time. There are things about your father and Thompson Corp that you need to know that could change everything. Meet me in an hour at the abandoned dock in the industrial sector. Come alone." Before Emma could respond, the call cut off. "Who was that?" Andrea asked, noticing the paleness on Emma's face. Emma hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know, but I think I'm about to discover the truth about my father." For better or worse, the night was cold and damp. When Emma arrived at the abandoned dock, the place was deserted, illuminated only by the dim light of some rusty street lamps. Despite Andrea's warning, Emma decided to attend the mysterious meeting alone. As she waited, she mentally reviewed the events of the past few weeks. Her life had taken a 180-degree turn, and now she was about to face a truth that could change everything again. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps on rusted metal alerted her. A figure emerged from the shadows, an older man looking tired but with intelligent, penetrating eyes. "Miss Thompson," the man said, approaching. "Thank you for coming to Miami is Ernest Vida. I was an old friend of your father." Emma looked at him cautiously. "I've never heard of you," and smiled sadly. "I'm not surprised Richard was conscientious about separating his personal life from certain aspects of his business." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, feeling her heart race. Ernest looked around before continuing. Emma, what I'm about to tell you will change how you see your father, Thompson Corp, and perhaps the entire world. Are you prepared for that? Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure she was your father. Ernest began wasn't the man you thought you knew. Yes, he was a brilliant businessman, and in many ways a good man. But he was also involved in something much bigger and more dangerous, the corruption network, Emma murmured. Nest shook his head. No, Emma. Your father was fighting against that network, you see. Years ago, Richard discovered the existence of a secret organization, a group of influential business people and politicians who were manipulating the country's economy for their benefit. Your father infiltrated that group with one goal: to dismantle it from within. Emma felt short of breath, but the documents, the police found part of his cover. Ernest explained your father had to do questionable things to maintain his facade, but it was all part of a larger plan. He was gathering evidence when preparing to expose the entire organization. Why didn't he do it? Emma asked, her mind struggling to process this new information. Ernest's face darkened because they found out the night before he could put his plan into action, and Richard Thompson died in a car accident that was no accident at all. Emma felt the world stop around her. Her father was not only not corrupt, but he had been a secret hero and paid the ultimate price. Why are you telling me this now? She managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Because you're in danger. Emma Nest responded urgently by exposing the conspiracy at Thompson Corp. You've alerted the organization. They believe you might have access to the information your father gathered, and they'll do whatever it takes to silence you. At that moment, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Several black cars appeared, surrounding the dock. They ran. Nest shouted and pushed Emma towards a hidden exit between the containers. As she ran, Emma heard gunshots and shouts behind her. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock at the revelations about her father's fear for her life, and a growing determination now she understood that her fight to save Thompson Corp was just the beginning. She had a bigger mission to complete the work her father had started, to expose the truth and demangle the organization that had cost Richard Thompson his life. As she slipped away into the night, Emma knew nothing would ever be the same. The path ahead was fraught with dangers, but she was determined to follow it, no matter the cost. What she didn't realize was that this decision would lead her to face enemies more powerful than she had ever imagined, and to uncover secrets that would shake the very foundations of society. The following days were a blur of frantic activity. Emma and her team worked tirelessly to organize and analyze the mountain of information they had recovered from every document, every recording, and every financial record, which was another piece of the intricate puzzle of corruption that her father had uncovered. Andrea explained that this goes beyond simple bribes or embezzlement, pointing to a complex network of transactions on her laptop about decades of systematic manipulation of the country's economy. Politicians judge business people, and they're all involved. Emma nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. And now it's up to us to expose it. Nest, who had been making discreet calls to his contacts, joined the conversation. I've arranged a meeting with the Attorney General, which is risky, but it's our best chance to bring this to justice. Can we trust him? Charlie asked. Always cautious, we have to. Emma replied with determination it was our only option. The meeting was scheduled for the following night at a safe house on the city's outskirts, and as they prepared, Emma couldn't help but think of Barbara and her sacrifice at the warehouse. Had she managed to escape, or had she paid the ultimate price for her final act of redemption when the time for the meeting came? The tension was palpable. The Attorney General, a middle-aged man with astute eyes and a grave expression, listened silently as Emma and her team presented the evidence. The Attorney General finally said, "This is extraordinary," leafing through the documents. "If this is true, we're looking at the biggest corruption scandal in the country's history." Emma affirmed that my father gave his life for this information. Now, we're asking you to do the right thing and act on it. The Attorney General looked at them for a long time before nodding. I will, but you must understand this will be challenging. The people implicated are influential and won't go down without a fight. Just at that moment, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police car lights illuminated the windows of the house. "It's a TR," Andrea shouted, running towards the back door, but it was too late. The house was surrounded. Victor entered, flanked by police officers and men in suits. "Sorry to interrupt this little meeting," he said with a cold smile. "Emma Thompson, you're under arrest for theft, corporate espionage, and conspiracy against the state." Emma looked at the Attorney General, who avoided her gaze. "You're part of this." The Attorney General at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, but the real power isn't in exposing the truth. It's in controlling it." As they were handcuffed and led out of the house, Emma felt her world crumbling. Everything they had fought for, all of her father's sacrifice, seemed to have been in vain. Still, just as they were putting her in the police car, she saw something that gave her hope in the crowd of journalists and onlookers gathered outside the house, and she recognized a familiar face. It was an assistant who was an undercover investigator, and in her hand, she held a USB drive identical to the one they had just confiscated from Emma. With an almost imperceptible movement, Anna nodded in her direction before disappearing into the crowd. Emma understood the message: the fight wasn't over. As the police car drove away, Emma looked out the back window, watching the safe house shrink in the distance. But instead of despair, she felt renewed determination. Yes, they had captured her. Yes, it seemed the conspiracy had won. But Emma knew that as long as the truth existed, and as long as people were willing to fight for it, there would always be hope. The road ahead would be difficult. She would face trials both in the courts and in the court of public opinion, and the conspiracy would use all its power to discredit and silence her. Still, Emma Thompson, who had become a crusader for justice, was ready for the battle, because now she understood the actual price of power. It wasn't money, influence, or even control. Real power was in the truth and courage to defend it against all odds. As the car disappeared into the night, Emma made a silent promise to her father, to herself, to all those who had been victims of this vast conspiracy. Why? The truth would come to light no matter the cost. And so, with Emma in custody but hope still alive, the stage was set for the next battle in the war for truth and justice, a battle that would determine not only the fate of Thompson Corp, but the future of an entire nation, because, as Emma had learned, true power doesn't reside in those who hold high positions or control vast fortunes, but in those who dare to stand up to injustice and fight for what is right, regardless of the consequences. The story of Emma Thompson, the heist-turned-heroine, was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning.